Rise of Hawk, Part 3, Scene 15. Terrace sat in the stifling humidity of the air vent and listened. Above him, the next curve in the pipework should let him out onto the roof. There would be task force operative teams out there, but how many and how close he didn't know. There were no sounds of voices or weapons being loaded, only the deep thrum of air conditioning fans. His wristwatch told him it was 5 minutes until midday. He'd have to take out as many of the teams on the roof as he could before Bana arrived to pick him up. The helicopter wouldn't take much weapons fire, and he wasn't wearing a vest, so he had to be at his very best and incredibly lucky. Careful to keep noise to an absolute minimum, Terrace stood up inside the air vent and peered out at the roof. Looking for all the world like a periscope, the vent obscured him on all sides except at the round opening. Someone had unscrewed the vent cover from the outside and propped it on the roof, resting against the aperture and concealing much of the opening. Hawk must have some kind of ally to help him with all of these preparatory tasks, and he must be a highly skilled time psi to know what would happen in such precise detail. Surely, in the long run, Jaran didn't stand a chance against such preemptive knowledge. The metal around him hadn't been painted with psi-suppressant material, but there were other things out on the roof, making his empathic survey senses patchy at best. This made locating the nearest target more than a little difficult. He pulled himself onto the roof surface. As he pulled himself onto the roof surface, his foot bumped the vent cover, and it clattered down onto the slate. The noise wasn't particularly loud, but he froze and listened. "What's that?" said a voice that was far too close. "Don't know," answered another. Hunkered down, Terrace lifted his primary weapon from the small of his back and his secondary from the pocket. They were both loaded. Flicking off the safeties of both weapons, he stood upright. Moving sideways around the edge of a wall, he caught sight of a four-man team and started firing. 2 of the 4 went down immediately with bullets through their foreheads. A stray bullet ricocheted off another air vent, and the 3rd dropped to the ground, screaming and grasping at an injured leg. Whipping back under cover, he moved around to the other side of the wall and took out the 4th man from behind. The 5th shot silenced the screaming man. Turning away from the carnage, Terrace looked around for cover. The roof was a chaotic landscape of periscope-shaped air vents, walled boxes for elevator maintenance, antennas and stairwell entrances, so there was a lot of cover. Ducking behind an elevator box, he put his back against the metal psi-suppressant surface and reloaded his primary from the stash of clips in his pocket. He heard yelling coming towards him from his left. He waited until they were close enough before stepping out of cover and taking out 2 of the next team before they were even aware of him. Automatic fire sounded from the 2 remaining agents, and he dropped back out of sight. He skirted the elevator box to get a better firing angle. As he walked, the vibrating alarm of his wristwatch went off. It was midday, and Bana was due. Pulling out of cover again, he fired, taking out the 2 remaining members of the 2nd team. Flicking on the safeties of his handguns, he shoved them back into their holsters. The auto lay on the ground next to its dead owner, and he grabbed it, finding 5 full auto clips in the man's jacket. More gunfire sounded, and there were figures running towards him with weapon barrels flashing as they fired. There were 2 more teams, but so far only 1 auto. He dropped the old clip and snapped the new mag in with practiced ease. Stepping behind another elevator box, he opened fire on the agents running towards him. Some fell, others jumped for cover. Above him, the air began to hum with the sound of helicopter blades. 3 copters came into view at a distance from the tower, close enough for their cameras to be rolling, but not so close that a stray bullet would easily take them out. Turning, he saw 2 more coming towards him from the south. 5 helicopters in the air, and none were getting close to the roof. Bana was late. "Well, at least my death will put on a show for the cameras," thought Terrace with a cynical snort. Returning weapons fire made him duck and run towards the edge of the building. Crouching over a vent, he aimed and fired a short burst at one man who was out in the open. He dashed onto the next cover. He had to keep moving. Being still for too long meant death. Weaving between vents and broad antenna bases, he took out 2 more agents as they came into view. He reloaded the audio and skirted around the back of the stairwell entrance. Shouting and the sounds of running echoed out of the open doorway towards him. It sounded like a lot of agents were coming up to the roof. He laughed. Junior really wants to stop me. The agents spilled out onto the roof, firing their autos. He took out a few before their numbers overwhelmed his ability to get all of them and not get shot himself. He pulled left, running for better cover as bullets ricocheted off the metal behind him. There were too many of them now, and he was running out of time. Haida Jenna, where the nooth is Bana? Diving behind a broad power dish, he rolled back up onto his feet and got into firing position over the dish edge. A deep, thrumming pulse vibrated the air, and it was so close his eardrum started to echo the noise into his skull. A gunshot fired behind him, and he spun around, lifting the auto. The helicopter was huge and shiny black as if it had never been flown before. The markings on the side claimed it was a television network copter, though he knew it had to have been stolen or loaned for Bana to be sitting in the pilot's seat. The back door was open, and a dark-haired woman sat with a long-barreled sniper rifle aimed at the roof. The rifle fired again. Terrace, get in the softened helicopter. The woman's mental voice was cool and crisp, a deep, dark blue with a flare of orange mischief waiting under the surface. He knew immediately that he had enjoyed her company in the days ahead. Dropping the auto, he ran towards the edge of the building and jumped, landing on the deck, side on. Go! Someone yelled on a broad telepathic range, and the floor dipped sideways and down. Terrace Mala, I presume? The tall, leggy woman grinned down at him. It's too much noise to speak, so we answered mind to mind. At your service. You're Asha? I am. It'll be a while before we have time alone to talk, but we will. For now, we'll be landing in a nearby airport, then taking the others to a secure safe house. He sensed her switch to a narrow telepathic band, so tight that a 10-5 telepath would struggle to pick it up. As far as anyone else knows, you haven't met him. Do you understand? Terrace nodded slowly. Of course. Scene 16. Bana stood in the blue and green tones of the sitting room of a rebel safe house. He held his daughter in his arms. He was distinctly thankful that the safe house Asha had taken them to was clean and dry, and not the abandoned type of building they usually inhabited. He tightened his grip around Goose's shoulders and suppressed the ridiculous urge to cry for the joy of having her back again. Goose's little giggle penetrated the high-roofed space. Daddy, I can't breathe. He lifted her higher into his arms and just laughed for the joy of it all. I'm sorry, honey. I just missed you so much. I missed you too, Daddy. She wrapped her little arms around his neck for a moment. He sensed a flow of love and comfort from her. She was only 5, and yet she understood that he needed comfort too. Goose let go of his neck and frowned at him. Did you know Nanny Trian puts cake sprinkles on sandwiches? He laughed again. Yes, I did. What did you think of it? Yummy. They were crunchy and tasted just like bubblegum. He lifted an eyebrow at her. And how do you know what bubblegum tastes like? Auntie Della gave us some. Me and Mana and Wolf. It was yummy, but I got in trouble for swallowing it. Why chew something if you're not going to eat it? Bana leaned forward and kissed his precocious daughter's pale hair. I don't know, my love. Adults can be silly sometimes. Asha brushed past them, going through the sitting room into the nearby kitchen. He glanced in her direction, feeling a little spark of guilt. The rebels had given him back his life, his freedom, and his daughter. Well, Asha and Hawk had. And he had information which could put them in danger. He lowered Goosa to her feet and gave her a loving smile. Honey, Daddy needs to talk with Asha alone. Would you go into the other room and play with Bo and Temper? Okay, Daddy. As her little form moved out of view down the hall, he felt an irrational stab of fear that he might never see her again. He sighed and turned to look sideways at Asha as she finished pouring herself a coffee in the kitchen. Asha, I have something to tell you, but I need a promise from you and Hawk first. Lifting the mug to her lips, she leaned back against the kitchen bench. Okay, what do you need? Protection. I need you two to guarantee protection for me and Gusa. She smiled, an edge of mischief lifting into her dark blue eyes. You're in our most secure safe house. How much more protection would you need? He shook his head. Yes or no, Asha? She shrugged. Of course, you wouldn't be here otherwise. He knew it might not be enough to keep him alive against Enigma's rage, but he also knew he couldn't keep silent anymore. The rebels he had met were good people and didn't deserve whatever Enigma was planning. He sighed. You have a spy in your midst, the one you call Nathan. She stood upright. What? His real name is David Cody. He's Orion's brother, and he's extremely dangerous. I'm sorry, I knew from the day I was captured, but he threatened Gusa if I told anyone who he was. Haida, she whispered. She didn't sense any anger in her, although she was very tense. She put her mug down on the bench behind her. You stay here with Orion and the 3 children, and for founder's sakes, don't tell Orion, or she'll run and we won't be able to protect her. Of course, Bana nodded. Asha walked towards him, and as she passed by, she put a hand on his arm. I would have done the same thing in your position, Bana. Her hand dropped, and she continued walking. Terrace, she yelled. There's trouble. I need your help. Scene 17. The motor was still running when Nama and Tay found it. A green car parked haphazardly on the side of the road. It sat barely 10 metres from their building entrance. Nama swallowed. It was not a good sign. Not at all. He lifted his weapon and checked the back seat, but it was empty. Nama, Talon called from the driver's side door. It's Nathan. He's been shot. He moved around the car towards Talon. As he walked, Nama mentally reached through the building to the nearest telepath. Bring a stretcher outside. Now, get Wren too. Nathan must have driven himself from where he had been shot, because there was blood all over the steering wheel and his clothes. He was pale and his breathing was shallow. It looked bad. Behind them, one of their non-combatant rebels shot out through the front doors of the building towards them with an old canvas stretcher in their arms. They put the stretcher down on the sidewalk next to them. He and Talon pulled Nathan out of the car, and together they carefully lowered him. Once Nathan was properly laid down, he and Talon lifted the stretcher. The other rebel ran ahead of them and opened the door. As he walked, Nama felt Asha's mind connect to him. Nama, have you seen Nathan? We've just found him on the street. He's been shot. How bad is he? Not good, but Wren's inside. Should be fine if he holds on. We're nearly back. Keep him at the entrance? Yes, ma'am. They carried Nathan into the dim entrance hall. Old Wren came towards them out of the darkness, and they put the stretcher down on the ground. It was colder in the lobby, and it took a moment for Nama's eyes to adjust to the gloom. Old Wren lifted away Nathan's battered jacket and started clearing the rags away from the bullet wound in his stomach. Behind Nama, footsteps entered from outside. He turned to look. Asha stood in the doorway. She and the tall, dark-haired man behind her had very tense eyes. Nama, this is Terrace. He's come to help. He lifted one eyebrow at the man. Why do we need help? Nama, Marcus interrupted him. He turned to see the young man come towards them from inside the building. Marcus came around Talon and the stretcher, but looked down at the ground with a frown. Is that Nathan? Yes, he should be fine. He shook his head dismissively. What did you need? The light reflection from outside made Marcus's purple eyes almost glow when he looked up from the ground. Have you seen Nala? Asha interrupted. She's not back yet. No, she's nearly an hour late. Right. Asha used her commanding voice to bark orders. Ma and Tay, go and look for her. Marcus. Nama pulled the van keys from his jeans pocket and threw them. Take the van and let us know when you find it. Marcus caught the keys and nodded. Yes, sir. 2 of them passed the group and disappeared outside. The narrow entrance hall was quiet for a little, as those who remained watched Wren healing Nathan's stomach wound. When the bullet pushed out through the rags Nay wore and Wren stepped back, the new arrival with Asha moved around the stretcher and lifted a weapon to bear on Nathan. Nama frowned at him. What's going on? This man's name is not Nathan. The new guy's voice was cold and almost hostile. What? He's an agent. Nama glanced at Asha for confirmation. Her eyes were tense, but she nodded. We need to move him down to the basement, and I want this kept under wraps, got it? If the others find out, they'll kill him before we get any information. Nodding slowly, Nama was too shocked to answer. Asha put a hand on Wren's arm. Her voice was softer, but no less commanding. Wren, would you go find the sedatives? She stepped around the stretcher to grab one end and looked up at Nama, her dark blue eyes betraying the tension that her body otherwise concealed. Ready? He nodded, and together they lifted Nathan. They made their way slowly through the maze of narrow corridors towards the basement stairwell. While they walked, Nama struggled with his surprise and shock. He knew Nathan had some peculiar behaviours and tended to disappear at inopportune moments. He was also oddly stoic most of the time. But a spy? Wouldn't a spy have killed everyone already? They descended the stairs into the dank basement air. At the foot of the stairs they angled across the room to another door. The place had once been used as some kind of workshop, with an old wooden bench in one corner and empty shelving and nails for hanging tools scattered around the walls. The adjacent room must have been used for storage, but it was lockable and mostly side-shielded, so they'd used it to hold Bana when he was a prisoner. As they arrived at the door to the adjacent room, Nama finally got his voice back. Are you sure? Yes, the newcomer was very serious. He's A0, very high-ranking and extremely dangerous. I can't imagine what he was here for. What was he doing? Chores, mostly. Nothing big. Why? Terrace shook his head. He would have been here for a specific reason. His specialty is killing, not recon or spying. What else did he do? He and Asha stepped through into the dingy side room and placed the stretcher down onto a low table in the centre of the room. Nama shrugged. I don't know. Nothing. When he wasn't doing chores, he hung out with... He swore under his breath. Nalana. And she's missing? Nama swallowed and nodded. Yes. Well, I hope for her sake that she's found soon. She's not the type to leave loose ends. The look in the man's eyes forced a shaft of icy fear down Nama's spine. Scene break. Nama stood with his back against a grimy wall. He swallowed. I really don't want to be here. Nathan lay unconscious, tied to a cot in the middle of the basement room. Nama had never witnessed a telepathic interrogation, and he'd kind of hoped he wouldn't ever. Asha glanced at him across the room. You okay with this? Not really. She gave him a sympathetic smile. It's the only way we... Yeah, I know, he interrupted her. Is Kita here yet? No, if he's not here soon, Terrace will have to... A groan of pain came from the cot, and they both stiffened. Nathan's arms and legs tightened against the ropes that held him down. What's happening? A broken voice asked the air. Why did you come back to base, Nathan? She demanded. Is Gwen dead? What are you talking about? His voice was quiet. She shot me. Nathan's square face was pale, but his eyes were calm. He didn't seem to be afraid, though anyone else would be. Nama cleared his throat. What about Nalana? Ice blue eyes glanced at him. She's at the cathedral, isn't she? Will someone tell me what's going on? Asha's voice was cold. You're a spy. What? He made another noise of pain. That's ridiculous. No. Terrace stepped in through the open door with Kita in tow. It's not ridiculous, David Cody. Seeing Terrace, Nathan's jaw tightened, and he sighed. Terrace Malar. What did you do with Gwen and Cass? She shot me. Do the math. So the great enigma got taken down by a lowly A2? Terrace laughed. Never thought I'd see that. Asha stepped forward with her hand up. Enough. Taunting will not get the information we need. Kita? Yes, ma'am. Kita stepped forward out of the doorway. His voice was quiet, and although Nama wasn't an empath, he could sense in his manner that he disliked doing this job. There was a pause, and Nathan grunted. The young man's whole body tightened under Kita's enforced mental pain. Name, rank, and code in, demanded Terrace. His voice was ice-cold, harsh, and dripping with hostility. Nama swallowed back the shaft of terror that shot through him. Terrace had transformed into something emotionless and alien. He hoped for an absurd second that it was Terrace who was the spy and not Nathan. Dobrid Cody, A0, rank 6. Nathan's voice had the same alien hostility under the crackle of pain. Elite operative, first class. Code in, A0, 40177. Access, 101826. Nama sighed. The fear and uncertainty in him dropped away, and in its place fled a spark of rage. His jaw tightened. Betrayed again. What is your mission? Terrace barked. Nathan's face lifted into a smirk, and he did not reply. Something was wrong. Nama frowned and looked sideways at Kita. Sweat had formed on the man's forehead, darkening his blonde hair. The muscles throughout his face were tight and strained. Kita let out a whoosh of breath and shuddered. Asha, Terrace, he's a buried mind shield. So? Said Nama, lifting one eyebrow at him. Kita levelled him with calm grey eyes. You don't understand. Because of the shield I cannot fully anchor in his mind. If I pierce the shield to anchor, I'll almost certainly kill him. Nama let his rage underline his voice. So kill him. No, Nama. Asha's tone was low but commanding. We need information from him before he's killed. She sighed tensely. Kita, can you at least knock him out? No, ma'am. Then will you go upstairs, find Wren and get the sedatives from him? We have too much to do right now. When we get back from the desert, we'll sort out what we're going to do with him. Nama, I need you to stay in Aram on guard duty. He crossed his arms over his chest and growled. Why me? Because I trust you to keep him alive. She turned out of the room with Terrace in tow. 24 hours, that's all.